Wearing is also on the cards. We've got the latest. Calls for the vaccine rollout to ramp up on both sides of the ditch to keep the Trans-Tasman bubble afloat. It's on hold till midnight tomorrow at least. Air New Zealand boss Greg Foran joins us live. A high school survey reveals widespread allegations of sexual harassment and cases of rape. The cruel killing of a native Kaka parrot. Doc needs your help solving this hideous whodunit. Riding the wave to Tokyo in the first ever Surf Olympics. And it's tino makadere, cold, very cold.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata tēnei. There are calls for urgent action following a survey of female school students which has uncovered widespread sexual harassment and several cases of rape. The Christchurch Girls High School commissioned survey revealed 60% have been harassed and 20 said they'd been raped by individuals or groups. National survivor advocate Louise Nicholas says the survey needs to be done nationwide.
I think every school should be doing it, including primary schools. I think we've got to stop being so PC about sexual violence prevention. This type of behaviour doesn't just happen to our girls, it also happens to our boys, and it also happens to our rainbow youth and those in the LGBT and disability communities.
Louise Nicholas says it's a wider issue that needs to be called out. Making it mandatory to scan the COVID Tracer app and wear masks in some high-risk venues mandatory are now on the table for Cabinet Ministers. The Prime Minister says bars and restaurants could be somewhere people are asked to scan in on arrival more easily than, for example, in retail. Jacinda Ardern says there are legal and practical considerations, including enforcement.
Ultimately, of course, we want people to be responsible for scanning themselves, but in terms of who's checking and enforcing, that's when you're looking at an operator. We know that's a big burden for them to carry, which is why we don't take these things lightly, and these are the questions we're getting advice on.
Jacinda Ardern says Cabinet's planning to make a decision on QR scanning next week. One issue ministers will have to look at is whether they can in fact mandate scanning within the rules set by Apple and Google. People in Wellington are urged to remain vigilant despite another day of no COVID-19 cases in the community. Advice from the Capital and Coast DHB is that any person with symptoms should contact their doctor or healthline, even if they were not at a location of interest. The College of GPs Medical Director Brian Betty says it's better to err on the side of caution.
I think it's very, very important we keep our awareness levels up, that we treat any cold or flu with due diligence and should be tested with a COVID swab.
Testing capacity remains high in Wellington, with several pop-up sites still operational. The Queenstown Lakes Mayor says the suspension of the Trans-Tasman bubble during the Australian school holidays will cost the resort town millions of dollars. 9 flights carrying more than 1,500 passengers from Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane to the resort town were cancelled today. Jim Bolt says it may be the last straw for some businesses who had been holding out for the Australian school holiday period. He suspects the bubble suspension will be extended and local businesses will have to instead start planning for the New Zealand school holidays. Snow has begun falling in parts of Dunedin as an Arctic blast hampers travel in the South Island. Flights remain disrupted in Queenstown, Invercargill and Dunedin. All Air New Zealand flights in and out of Invercargill Airport have been cancelled. Met Service has issued a road snowfall warning for Dunedin to Waitati Highway. Up to 4 centimetres of snowfall is expected on the ground. Waka Kotahi is urging motorists to drive to the conditions, avoid unnecessary travel if possible. State Highway 87 in Otago is closed due to snow, and the Milford Road, State Highway 94, has been closed overnight. Some locals in a small Otago town aren't being deterred by snowstorms in the region. A heavy snow watch is in force for Otago, with the temperature plummeting to -1 degree in the town of Lawrence. The Prospector Cafe and accommodation owner Fiona Anderson says the snow's not settling enough to start a snowball fight just yet.
Well, it's a bit grey and there's big white dollopy flakes falling from the sky, which is very nice. They're just big fat snowflakes that are mostly rain, so unfortunately they're not settling. Just a wee bit of a slushy mess.
Fiona Anderson says the cafe's $3 hot chocolate special has managed to lure in locals and motorists. It's 4 minutes past 5. Nearly 2 years after securing an Olympic qualifying berth, whangamata surfer Ella Williams is delighted to know she's finally going to the Tokyo Olympics. Williams and Raglan's Billy Stearman have both been selected to compete at the Games, where surfing will make its Olympic debut. Williams says it's been a roller coaster of emotions since the pair provisionally qualified in September 2019.
It is pretty tough just waiting for that official call, but I'm very stoked. It's finally official and we are 2.5 weeks out and I couldn't be more excited. And finally getting the uniform today, it makes it feel more real.
French referee Romain Poit has admitted he got a late call wrong that denied the All Blacks a chance of a series win over the British and Irish Lions in 2017. The 3-test series ended 1-1 following a 15-all draw in the Eden Park decider when Poit, with 2 minutes left on the clock, overruled his own offside decision, awarding the All Blacks a penalty. The decision incensed All Blacks fans, and 4 years later Poit has told the Rugby Pass website that he made a mistake, and after the match trashed his Eden Park changing room in anger at his mistake. Defending champions Portugal have been eliminated from football's European champs, going down 1-0 to Belgium. Belgium will now play Italy in quarterfinals. The Czech Republic upset the Netherlands 2-0 to advance to the final 8. That's the news.
COVID-19 testing continues in Wellington.
We're going to need maybe a week testing to really know if there is any community transmission. So we do need to keep those testing numbers up.
Businesses struggle at level 2.
I don't think anyone was out on Courtney Place. It was a terrible weekend. I don't think I've seen it this quiet in my 20 plus years on Courtney Place.
The ski season goes cold.
The timing's terrible. We were hoping to see a much busier ski season. Yeah, we're gutted to see the pause in travel.
Here at any alert level, morning reports weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. A cold outbreak brings snow to low levels in both islands and gales to many areas. Taranaki across to Taupo and Bay of Plenty northwards, occasional showers clearing tomorrow afternoon. Whanganui, Manawatu and Taihape, showers with snow to 400 metres tomorrow. Horowhenua to Wellington, also Gisborne to Waitarapa. Mostly fine tonight, showers tomorrow, possibly thundery. Snow to 300 metres in the south. Marlborough and Nelson mainly fine, showers before dawn tomorrow. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, showers, some heavy snow in Fiordland, showers clearing Westland tonight, elsewhere tomorrow. Canterbury, scattered showers, possible thunderstorms about the coast. Snow lowering to 200 metres tomorrow morning. Otago and Southland, heavy showers and possible thunderstorms, snow lowering to near sea level, showers easing and becoming isolated tomorrow. Chatham Island, showers with snow about the hilltops tomorrow night. RNZ National, it's 7 minutes past 5.
Kia ora rā, Susana. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Scanning QR codes could be made compulsory at high-risk venues like bars and restaurants. Te Pirimia Jacinda Ardern says Cabinet is also considering whether to mandate more widespread use of masks or face coverings at level 2 or higher. So far, there's no community cases here after an infected Australian visitor hit a bunch of Wellington hotspots. All quarantine-free travel to Australia, though, is suspended until at least 11:59pm tomorrow night, with several new infections emerging across the ditch. The government strongly indicated pre-departure tests will be needed once those flights resume. Meanwhile, 2 contacts of a positive COVID case at the remote Newmont granite gold mine in Australia's Northern Territory have travelled here to New Zealand, where they are now in isolation. One's returned a negative test, the other is still waiting on a result. Well, joining me now is Air New Zealand CEO Greg Foran. Kia ora, Greg.
Kia ora, Lisa.
What's this Trans-Tasman pause doing to Air New Zealand?
Causing plenty of disruption, I might add, for particularly our customers, but also for us as we make the adjustments that are necessary.
How many flights do you reckon you've cancelled and what's it costing you?
Look, we were doing around about 30 a day and we've had to pull that back down to 10 a day. We're still running a cargo business, and in terms of the financial impact, that's something that we'll just work through. It's a bit early to tell exactly what that's going to be until we get some sense of how long this is going to continue.
So how long can you sustain that for then?
Quite a while. We've got a good domestic business. Cargo continues to be pretty strong for us. Rarotonga is obviously still operating, and I'm confident that in time we'll get on top of the Tasman and be back flying there.
So in essence, because Australians can still fly home, so are you sending planes to Oz with people wanting to go home and basically bring them back empty?
It's a bit of both. So primarily it's more people heading back to Australia. And as I said, we've still got cargo flights operating that are vitally important.
So what is the future of your Cairns and planned Sunshine Coast flights then?
Well, we've had to unfortunately cancel the inaugural flight of both of those. So Maroochydore was going today, Cairns tomorrow. And we'll assess once we start to get some sense on what's happening across in Australia as to whether we commence those next round of flights, which from memory I think were Wednesday and Friday of this week. But certainly the first two, when we had a look at what was happening there with customers and what they required, it made sense not to run those first two flights.
No suggestion that you might park those up on a semi-permanent basis, given the uncertainty?
No, I don't think so. I think, once again, our view is let's just work this one through carefully, and we know that the demand is there, and as soon as we feel we can get back up and running, then we're keen to do exactly that.
What does this mean for the amount of, I call them COVID credits that you would be holding right now?
Well, it will certainly build them up. We saw lots of activity across our call centre, and I would want to say to customers that thanks for your patience. We had 12,000 calls in the call centre yesterday, and wait times blew out, as you would expect. Whilst we gear up, we don't gear up for the sort of activity that we experienced on Saturday night. So the credits will move for those people who have fares that are non-refundable. Then we get those into credit, and wherever possible, customers can do that themselves.
Overall, Greg, can you give us an idea of how much you're holding in credits? Because obviously this has been going on for some time.
Yeah, look, Lisa, that's not a number that we put out there publicly, but it will move up, to some extent as we deal with this.
What do you think about the speed of the vaccine rollout here in New Zealand? Because obviously that materially affects your business.
For sure. And, I would say that I think it's pretty clear that, the quicker that we can get vaccinations rolled out, obviously through Air New Zealand, and we've done a pretty good job to date. We're running it just under 80% across all our frontline staff at the moment, and it varies by work group. But across the public, as soon as we can get people vaccinated, then I think it gives us a sense of getting some of these borders open a bit wider than just Australia and Rarotonga.
About 8% of New Zealanders fully vaccinated at the moment. Is that too slow?
I'd like to see that a little bit higher than that, to be honest with you, Lisa. But, we need to work with all the relevant authorities, and, we can start to pick that up towards the end of July and then move with pace over the next few months. That would be really terrific.
What confidence do you have that we'll all have the vaccination by everyone who wants it by the end of the year?
I'm pretty confident of that, Lisa, in any of the discussions I've been having, and I think that would put us in a good spot.
Is the bubble actually worth it right now, Greg?
For sure. When you're doing 30 flights, which is what we were doing, and that business was building, so, the important thing is it gave a chance for, family and friends to reconnect. We were seeing increasing business traffic as people were getting confident. I think we all knew that there was a risk this was going to occur, that, when this was put in place, there were, procedures put in place, and so it's played out, but it will open up again, and we'll get going.
So at 30 flights a day, right, can you give us some perspective here? What percentage of your revenue was this bringing in?
Oh, look, probably about 15%, 20%.
So it's a good chunk of change for you.
Oh, for sure. We were keen to get that open, and I've spoken publicly before about that being the impetus for us to move from survive to revive.
Do you have concerns that this will just make people gun shy and they won't want to book again because they see disruption as inevitable?
The answer to that is overall, I'm not too concerned. And the basis for that is that what I've seen, both domestically and also with halts or pauses that we've had on the Tasman to date, because remember, this isn't the first one. We had Perth go in a couple of times. We've had Melbourne go in, is that people actually move on reasonably quickly. So, it certainly has an impact for a few weeks, but then what we're seeing is customers actually getting back to some sense of normality and keen to travel. And, domestically, I continue to be really encouraged by our domestic business. We're going into July school holidays, and at this stage, we're looking to be around about 125% of what we were pre-COVID. So I think this is going to come back. It does put a dent in things, but we will rebound.
Speaking about getting on the move, is Air New Zealand headed out to the airport with its offices?
It's something that we're looking at this stage, Lisa, and, as we do that assessment, there's a good chance that could well occur.
And what's driving that decision?
Well, we've got plenty of space out there, for one. I like the fact that would put us close to the operations of our business and be close to where most of our people work. So those are really the key drivers for that.
So high likelihood you'll end up based out there?
That's certainly on the cards at this stage.
And when will you make a decision by?
Well, we're working through that. So over the next few months, we'll pull all the data together so that we can really start to look at that in real detail.
Greg, have you told staff there's another restructure coming?
We don't have another restructure going, Lisa. So, we've taken a lot of action over the last 18 months. We continue to be, very tight on costs in terms of how we're going to operate, but we're also being pretty sensible about the business as it begins to build out of this. This is a hiccup, and as I said, we knew this was going to happen, so I think we're in pretty good shape and we'll continue to progress the business and get ourselves back up and running.
Ngā mihi mo te rā, that is Air New Zealand CEO Greg Foran. It is 16 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Still to come on the program, the hideous whodunit that Doc needs your help solving. The start of the Australian school holidays was meant to be a lifeline for Queenstown beleaguered businesses. Instead, that lifeblood has been cut off. The government's closed the Trans-Tasman bubble for at least 72 hours, and now those in the tourist town face being left out in the cold after the Prime Minister ruled out financial help. Our reporter Timothy Brown and cameraman Nathan McKinnon are in Queenstown.
The International Arrivals Lounge at Queenstown Airport was meant to be buzzing today for the start of the Australian school holidays. Instead, there's not even a whimper. Mark Rose, Chief Executive of the Rees Hotel, says the timing of the Trans-Tasman bubble's closure couldn't have been more cruel to Queenstown.
Yeah, it's horrific. I mean, starting last Monday, we took the first punch and we lost a bunch of business out of New South Wales, which is our biggest market for the Rees and probably for Queenstown out of Australia. And then when they closed down Australia, it's just been horrific. We've never seen cancellations like it.
A week ago, local businesses were preparing for 9 flights from Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane to arrive at Queenstown Airport today, bringing with them more than 1,500 visitors. Instead, the only international flight going through this airport is leaving the resort. Mark Rose says as a result, vacancy rates are skyrocketing.
To give you a number, on the last Monday for the 1st of July, I was at just on 100% full. This Monday at 9 a.m, for the 1st of July, I was at 35%, and when I left the office 10 minutes ago, we were below 30%.
He's pragmatic though, saying local businesses can't expect the government to keep shelling out cash forever. Up on Cardrona Alpine Resort, the snow has finally arrived. Unfortunately, the visitors haven't. Ewan Mackey, Head of Operations at Cardrona Alpine Resort, says there's a sole Australian family staying at the resort's apartments, but they'll be leaving in the coming days.
We have around about 30% of our guests come from Australia. So at this time of year, with it being the Aussie school holidays, we'd expect quite a few of the Australians out and about. We see lots coming through for their ski trips. Also just a lot of visitation to the snow play and first-timer skiing. So obviously we'll be losing that element of the business. But, our thinking is it's a short-term moment, and hopefully we'll be able to welcome those Aussie whānau back later on in the season, perhaps.
He says if the bubble reopens tomorrow, there'll be plenty of the white stuff waiting for Australians after a decent dump caused Cardrona to close today.
We're receiving a good old southerly storm, so it's blowing up into the 70s and 80s kilometres an hour, so we can't actually run the lifts. What's good about that is of course bringing us some fresh new snow, and cold temperatures with that southerly are enabling us to make some snow as well. So it's a storm which is closing us down today, but sets us up better for the season ahead.
And Queenstown Lakes Mayor Jim Bolt says that's good news for when the New Zealand school term ends, as he suspects the Trans-Tasman bubble will remain closed for much of the Australian school holiday period. He's gutted for locals, as this week held so much promise.
This was the week that we've been waiting for since the 6th of April when the bubble was announced. I'm now hearing from hoteliers, operators, just that bookings are being cancelled by the dozen. Somebody described it as an avalanche of cancellations. Instead of being a fabulous week, it's a bit of a gloomy week, I'm afraid.
Everyone in the resort has their fingers crossed for good news from the government tomorrow. But even if the last-minute life support comes through for struggling businesses, it may be too late for some.
Homai Ofakaro, we'd love to hear from you on that one. Do you think that Tahuna, Queenstown, should get support from the government, with all those businesses saying that they've got cancellations aplenty, running potentially into the millions? Should there be financial assistance for them? You can get in touch via text 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoints@rnz.co.nz. Nō reira anei no kaupapa mō te hōtaka nei. The other thing I want to hear from you on is this, whether we should make it compulsory to scan QR codes, and the Prime Minister is just talking about it, high-risk areas like bars and restaurants. Let us know your thoughts on that one as well. Testing numbers have dropped from the heights recorded last week, but centres and GPs in Wellington are gearing up for another surge. People who are at the same places as the Sydney traveller last weekend are required to get tested 12 days after exposure, which will be Thursday and Friday. The capital woke to a further 48 hours at alert level 2 today after the tourist was confirmed as infectious nearer the end of his stay. Emma Hatton reports.
It was a collective sigh of relief again today for the capital, with no new community cases to report. GPs across the city reported fewer people coming in to be tested, but Porirua Dr Larry Jordan says the phones were still running hot.
There's a lot of kids with viral colds at the moment, and of course, you know, the families and sometimes the parents are getting the colds as well, so they are phoning out to find out what they should do. Should they get swabs? Should they be isolating? And we're handing out that advice to them in large numbers.
In Karore, GP Jeff Lowe says testing rates will pick up again at the end of the week.
Already we're starting to book patients in who have been exposed and are needing a swab at day 12. Those people are currently self-isolating at home. We'll be doing a day 12 swab and looking forward to coming out of self-isolation after day 14.
So far, 2,597 people have been identified as contacts of the Australian person. Of those contacts, 2,273 have returned a negative result. And while it's of course not the first time the capital has been in tightened restrictions, central businesses are feeling the impact keenly. Chris Huang is the manager of Dumpling and says takings are down 80%, which is much worse than before.
This time is more serious. Last time we got quite serious on the first 2 days, but after that it's actually fine. And last time I think we only get job of about 20 to 30%.
He says the place opposite him hasn't even bothered to open, but he remains upbeat.
I think after the level 2 and then back to level 1, I think everyone back to work and people's going out is fine.
That sentiment was echoed by Jim Pinson, who runs the commercial leasing team at Colliers and is by no means downbeat on the state of the CBD.
It's really painful in the short term, but certainly for quality space on our Golden Mile, Willis, Manners, Lambton Quay, there's always demand for space. There's always high turnover. There's pretty relatively low vacancy. I think it will have an impact. There's no doubt about that. But I don't think it won't put the major chains off.
He says even if the alert level change remained for 3 or 4 weeks, it wouldn't affect demand. A decision on that alert level change will be announced tomorrow, with Dr Brian Betty, the Medical Director of the Royal New Zealand College of GPs, urging Wellingtonians to remain vigilant and call their doctor or healthline if they are symptomatic, even if they weren't at a location of interest.
I think it's very, very important we keep our awareness levels up, that we treat any cold or flu with due diligence and should be tested with a COVID swab.
Meanwhile, anyone who was in Australia from June the 21st and is now back here is being asked to keep a close eye on the locations of interest in various states because they're increasing daily.
It is, well, we'll basically say 5:25. Kia amo tonu mai, you're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Fijians are being warned to take COVID-19 more seriously or many more deaths will occur. Health authorities are blaming a spike in cases on people not following COVID rules. There are more than 2,800 active cases in Fiji, which has seen more than a dozen deaths from the virus. RNZ Pacific's Christine Ravoy reports.
COVID cases in Fiji are climbing by the hundreds. The head of the United Nations in the Pacific, Sanaka Samarasina, says the country currently has the capacity to control the situation on the ground. But if the positivity rate, which is at 7.4%, continues to rise, the situation could become rapid and dangerous.
Everybody who's eligible right now should be rolling up their sleeves and taking the jab. Especially those with underlying conditions, those who are most vulnerable, but really every single person in Fiji, citizens and residents alike, as soon as they are able to, they should go out there and get the vaccine.
More than 1,000 people have been arrested for breaching COVID protocols since the latest outbreak started in April. Samarasina says the crisis can only be prevented if people take it more seriously.
Even with the first dose, the likelihood of hospitalization drops tremendously. And with the second dose, the likelihood of serious illness from COVID-19 is, less than 10% because you have more than 90% immunity from serious illness.
The World Health Organization's Pacific Chief Akim Ali has a simple message for anyone reluctant to get the vaccine. It is safe. He says the WHO is working with Fijian health authorities to contain the spread of COVID.
In terms of how do we test the right groups of people? How do we ensure that the communication with the public is, in the right direction with the clearest messages? How do we ensure that we protect healthcare workers who are providing services at the front line? How do we do contact tracing appropriately? How do we do case isolation? Making sure we work within the resources that we've got.
Fiji's government launched its latest leg of its vaccination rollout today with the arrival of 70,000 doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine from Australia. Head of Fiji's Health Protection, Dr. Alicia Saukan, says they are bracing for a new wave of infections.
If that wave comes, our hospitals will be full of people with severe COVID-19 disease. What that will mean is that people who suffer from other illnesses that will not stop because of COVID-19, this is including people who get into accidents and need urgent treatment, they may also struggle to get treatment. And we know this because we've seen it in other countries.
Fiji's government continues to resist calls to enforce a national lockdown, with Prime Minister Frank Bainimarama saying this will have devastating effects on the economy and Fijian jobs. The government has ramped up its vaccination program. Instead, New Zealand and Australia have pledged more than 1 million doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine. Nearly 300,000 people have received at least their first dose of the vaccine, while about 20,000 have got both jabs.
DOC is appealing for clues to who caused the brutal death of an endangered kākā, the latest in a series of attacks on native wildlife. And that is the sound of a kaka. Sadly, a young male one was found emaciated on a property in Whangatio on Auckland's northeast coast last month. It was in such bad condition it had to be put down. But as DOC officer Tapua Hori explains, a post-mortem revealed something way more sinister. And just a warning, some of the detail here is disturbing.
The bird was in very poor condition, so in terms of its body condition, it was very light in weight. The veterinarian, as well as our district staff, decided the most humane action was to euthanize it. Following that, we did a necropsy, which identified that the bird was in far worse condition than we initially thought, by unveiling that there was a slug pellet, two to be precise, lodged in the bird's left leg. examination, the right leg was completely fractured in half.
That is pretty horrendous, isn't it?
It's appalling, yeah, definitely. For a threatened species in our native taonga to sort of go with it, for it to sort of come into this tragic end, it is appalling.
So do you think that the bird basically starved because it was crippled by being shot and having one of its legs broken?
That's right. The necropsy also indicated that the tail feathers were in quite rough condition, so that suggests that the bird had been dragging itself along the landscape for some time. And, I mean, if I'm not being too gruesome, in the necropsy, the skull had no hemorrhaging or no bruising. So that would indicate that had it had the bruising, it might allude to a car accident. However, because of the lack of bruising, the slug, pellets, and the right leg completely fractured, it seems that this is indicated by a violent attack on it by a person, an unidentified person.
Who would do that? I mean, what kind of idiot does that?
Yeah, the incident itself is without question appalling. So this is kind of why we're really appealing to the senseless crime against native wildlife.
So do you want people who may know something or have seen something to come forward here?
Definitely. We need the public right now to help us. So we would welcome information leading to enforcement action and compliance action to see that the end of this kaka wasn't in vain.
Do you reckon it was kids? Do you have any clues? And is this the first bird or situation where this has happened, where someone shot at them with pellets?
Unfortunately not. This is one of a number over the last couple of months involving native wildlife, namely birds, that have been found to have air rifle pellets lodged in them, causing either the immediate death of them or leading to its death. So do we think it's kids? It's hard to know. At this stage, we know that it was a factor in the bird's death, and we require the public to help us find this person who did this senseless crime.
Your whole job is making sure that, well, these creatures are safe. So what do you think when you see a bird coming to a pretty brutal end like this at the hands of, well, another human?
It is saddening, but my job, as well as my colleagues within DOC and the conservation community, is to see justice, for this bird. So, as well as its sadness, there is hope, and we will do everything we can to make sure that justice is brought.
What would you like to say to the person responsible, Tapu? Do you want them to come forward?
Oh, definitely. Put yourselves forward. Let us know who you are. And for anyone who has information, please come forward.
And that was Tapu Hori, who's a DOC officer. Now, in March, 8 gannets were shot at the Muriwai colony, and north of Auckland, a tui was shot with a slug gun. Now, here's a number you can call if you know something about the death of the kaka and who shot it. 0800 DOC HOT. 0800 DOC HOT for any tip or info you may have. Well, there's also an email address, wildlifecrime, all one word, @doc.gov.nz. So we'll put that up on our webpage. If you've got any clues or you know what happened, do get in touch with DOC. Kia ora, e te iwi e haere ake nei I a checkpoint. A high school survey reveals widespread allegations of sexual harassment and cases of rape. Hora Whenua residents are warned to turn the water tap down or risk running out altogether. And could Australia be on the verge of a national outbreak of the Delta COVID variant? Ho mai o whakaurau, nō reira anei nā kaupapa mō te hōtaka nei. What I want to hear from you tonight is on the Trans-Tasman bubble. Is it worth it? It's on pause, frozen at the moment until about midnight tomorrow. So should we reopen? When? And is it worth the trouble? Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint Checkpoint RNZ, or you can send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is time now for the headlines with Susanna.
Bars and restaurants could be somewhere people are made to scan in on arrival as the government considers changes to rules around contact tracing and mandatory masking. The Prime Minister says Cabinet Ministers will consider whether such changes are needed to the system and if they're workable. Jacinda Ardern says Cabinet's planning to make a decision on QR scanning next week. Air New Zealand have had to cancel about 20 Trans-Tasman flights each day due to the travel bubble being halted. The airline's chief executive Greg Forens told Checkpoint they were typically operating about 30 flights a day in the bubble, but that was now down to 10. He says the majority of the current flights were helping Australians return home or for cargo. Meanwhile, businesses in Queenstown are lamenting the suspension of the bubble, which they suspect will cost the town millions of dollars. 9 flights carrying more than 1,500 passengers scheduled to arrive from Melbourne and Brisbane in the resort town today were cancelled. The Queenstown Lakes Mayor Jim Bolt says it's a huge blow for the local economy. A Christchurch MP says the high incidence of sexual harassment and assault experienced by students at a local girls' school is part of a broader societal problem. About 59% of respondents at Christchurch Girls' High School said they had been harassed or experienced serious sexual assaults. The MP for Ireland, Sarah Pallett, says blame lies solely with the perpetrators. Travellers in the South Island are being warned to plan ahead as an Antarctic blast brings heavy snowfall, closes roads and forces airlines to cancel flights. State Highway 87 in Otago and State Highway 94 in Southland are now closed. Waka Kotahi says that Cantabrians should also be on alert, with snow expected overnight. Heavy swells are also expected in Cook Strait tomorrow, with the Inter-Islander cancelling crossings. Those are the latest headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Kia ora rā e hoa. No mai, hoki mai, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Ko taku manuhiri nai nei, ko Nicholas Poynton is in the studio to talk business. Let's start with this FMA kind of list of do's and don'ts. This is for influencers, like social influencers, but specifically in the financial sphere, is it?
The FMA, I don't know if they're responsible for this term, but if they are, I have to give them kudos for it, because they've used this term called finfluencers. And finfluencers, as you alluded to, are social media influencers who provide financial advice despite not necessarily having the legal right nor the qualifications to actually do so. And the regulator has decided to take this step and release a set of guidelines, sort of do's and don'ts really, about what people should be doing if they encounter this or if they're talking about investing finance money online, because this trend has really been on the rise in the past year really. And it's
so what, people checking into Instagram and someone saying invest your tens of thousands of dollars XYZ way.
Well, I think it goes hand in hand with the rise of retail trading apps and the various platforms like it, because it has really gone a long way to democratise investing. And with the apps, you've probably seen people who've had a degree of success, and with that success maybe comes an overinflated sense of one's ability with these platforms. Then they may consider themselves experts, but that's not necessarily, a way to sort of discourage people from seeking advice and things like that. There are people out there who do know what they're talking about, but the FMA's advice on this is that yes, it's okay to talk about finance and money and investing online, but the information, the discussion should really be at a general level, because if it slips into the highly regulated areas such as recommending specific investment funds, stocks or insurance, only registered financial advisors can actually legally do that. And the FMA has gone some way to provide some examples of what would be above board and kosher, and they use the example of saying to someone something like, look, governments are rolling out the COVID-19 vaccine around the world, stocks and tourism companies and airlines, which were badly hit by the pandemic, now would be a good time to think about buying into them. That's okay, that gets the green light from the FMA, but you could run into trouble if you said something like, buy shares in Airline X, the tourism boom is happening. When you step into that area of being quite definitive with your speech about this, you do run the risk of falling into trouble. But the FMA, just given from the way they're talking about this in their release and our interview with them today, they're not necessarily looking to be heavy-handed on this. They're not going to try and regulate what people are saying online. They say that they've already reached out to a number of people who may have engaged in this behaviour before, and trying to be very educative with their approach to this. Try and bring people along with the conversation. The more people talk openly about investing, they think it's probably a pretty good thing.
Okay, what's going on with the business finance guarantee scheme? Just remind people what it is.
One of the various measures that was unveiled last year in response to the pandemic, and this was specifically to help businesses, small businesses, and it was to help those businesses that may have struggled to get sort of credit or any sort of cash flow into their business because they may have sort of extended all their current debt facilities they had with their banker. So the lending was actually administered by retail banks, but what made it different was that 80% of any loan was actually guaranteed by the Crown. So the banks felt empowered to give out these loans. And now by most accounts, when this scheme was first introduced sort of midway through last year, it wasn't very popular. It seemed that the eligibility requirements were actually quite strict. In August, only about 780 firms had accessed it, about $150 million worth of debt. So the government take a number of steps to actually expand it. Businesses could now, after they made changes, access a loan of up to $5 million. It's an increase from $500,000. The loan term expanded from 3 to 5 years, and actually bigger businesses were now eligible to apply for this sort of credit. And it was at this point that Business New Zealand's Chief Executive Kirk Hope says that this is when the scheme became a lot more effective for those businesses that were having some cash flow issues. And it winds up on Wednesday. The latest figures show that about 3,300 firms accessed it. They tapped into about $2.8 billion, which is a significant increase from where they were in August with this scheme. And it appears that demand for credit was highest amongst wholesale and retail trade businesses. And when I put that to Kirk Hope, his view was that those disruptions to supply chains, firms wanted to get credit into their businesses to sort of offset the sort of disruptions that was creating. And unsurprisingly, Auckland had the highest demand for all types of credit. Not really surprising, given it's the real powerhouse of our economy. So it's the centre of it. So comes to an end. There are a few more schemes like this that we'll see sort of what sort of support they've been able to give businesses. But this one, by some accounts, seems to be quite successful.
Should we take a quick trot around the markets?
Yeah, the NZX is down 22 points to 12,603. The dollar at 70.7 US cents and 93.12 Australian.
Thanks, Nicholas. Nicholas Poynton with Business. There are calls for a wider investigation following a survey of female school students, which has uncovered widespread sexual harassment and several cases of rape. The Christchurch Girls High survey revealed 60% of students have been harassed, including groping or verbal abuse. Most incidents weren't reported. As Alicia Foon reports, the abuse happened on public transport, at fast food outlets or at parties. They involved boys from other schools and adult men. And a warning, some details in this report may disturb some listeners.
In the survey, more than 400 Christchurch Girls High School students reported sexual harassment, and 20 said they'd been raped by individuals or groups. The school's principal, Christine O'Neill, commissioned the survey of more than 700 students at the school after pupils tried to protest sexual harassment at Christchurch Boys High back in March, but they were turned back by police. She says the survey only shows part of the picture, as many girls talked about friends who were too traumatised to report being raped.
Shocked, I guess, by the scale and the ubiquitousness of it. Saddened that we have, for us, it's young women in our rainbow community. But there will be some male victims in some schools. In lots of ways, we're inadvertently training up the next Me Too generation.
The survey was carried out in May. It asked students to describe their worst incident of sexual harassment. 381 participants reported 2,677 incidents of sexual harassment in the first 5 months of this year. A number of assaults were implied but not stated, such as where girls were drunk and not able to give consent. Only 10% received any help. Head girl Ameria Tekau is glad the survey has given girls a voice and says young women should not have to put up with sexual harassment.
We are absolutely sick and tired of these behaviours, and we're ready to call them out. I think the girls and all the students at our school have a feeling that this behaviour has been totally normalised, and we've come to a point where we're ready to take action.
It's not just peers from other high schools, but also older males harassing students in public settings, on public transport and passenger service vehicles like Uber. Students reported being uncomfortable, nervous, degraded, upset, embarrassed and afraid. National Survivor advocate Louise Nicholas says other schools need to follow suit and says more people need to come forward to seek help and report their experiences.
I think every school should be doing it, including primary schools. I think we've got to stop being so PC about sexual violence prevention. This type of behaviour doesn't just happen to our girls, it also happens to our boys, and it also happens to our rainbow youth and those in the LGBT and disability communities. So it is a national problem.
President of the Secondary Principals Association, Vaughan Queo, says education is important and it points to a much wider issue.
It may be a localised thing, it may not. My gut reaction is that it's probably not. And as the father of a 14-year-old daughter myself, I want to make sure that whenever she goes up to the mall or goes out to the movies with whoever that may be, that she's safe in doing so and doesn't have to alter her plans because of the inappropriate behaviour of some other person.
Head girl Amelia Tekau says girls have altered their behaviour to avoid being assaulted, and that's wrong.
We have to make changes to our lives, the way we look, the places we go, in order to manage sexual harassment, and it's unacceptable on every single level. And this is things like not wearing skirts that are too short out in public, not being able to go outside after dark by yourself. These everyday little things, pretty much every single female or every single student or person who gets sexually harassed has in their minds consistently.
In response, the school has hired extra counsellors and brought in police. Christine O'Neill wants the Education Review Office to instigate another survey that would be open to schools around the country. She says the attitude of some boys and men towards women and girls was a systematic issue.
And I think there's a real role for our Education Review Office in that as the one agency, independent agency, that has a review responsibility over schools.
Education Minister Chris Hipkins didn't respond to interview requests, but a Ministry of Education spokesperson gave a statement saying they have contacted all Canterbury secondary schools today and, with the support of New Zealand Police, will keep working collaboratively to make sure all students can feel safe, heard and supported.
It's 5:45. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. He muriaki i ngā pitapita kōrero after the news at 6. Hukarere is falling, but where are all the Aussies? We go live to Queenstown. On that note, we've had a lot of feedback from you about whether those businesses down there that are facing cancellations should get any particular help. Terry's got in touch to say, let's not forget that the Australian travel bubble was negotiated prior to COVID-19 Delta coming on the scene. Now Delta is here, there needs to be a different approach. As far as I'm concerned, holidays are no longer a priority for New Zealand. Another person says perhaps Australia, New South Wales could compensate Queenstown as they have created the problem. Another listener says no more support for tourism. They overstated the benefits of the Trans-Tasman bubble. They expected taxpayers to carry the cost and risks, enough already, transform the tourism business model. But then someone else reckons Queenstown should absolutely get some financial assistance. There is a direct result of COVID. They have been struggling for over a year, and this was meant to be a better time to make money. Now it's the opposite. Money has been spent to get ready for the Australians and it's out of their control, so why not give them some assistance to help the poor businesses there? Well, do keep your feedback coming. Text us 2101 or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Australia could be on the verge of a national outbreak of the COVID Delta variant. 4 states and territories have reported new cases and have imposed lockdowns or tighter restrictions. World Watch's Paulina Lau has more.
COVID case numbers in New South Wales will bounce around and are expected to rise considerably. That's the message from Premier Gladys Berejiklian as the state records another 18 cases.
Of those 18 cases, all but one has been confirmed as a link, and the 18th case is actually in the vicinity of those other cases, and yet that link is yet to be established given some of these cases are fairly recent. About a third of them, about 6 of them, were in isolation for the entire time. A number of them were in isolation for part of the time, but some unfortunately were active in the community.
It's the second day of Greater Sydney's 2-week lockdown to contain the highly infectious Delta strain. The state is seeing almost 100% transmission within households and a very high rate of transmissibility. Ms Berejiklian is urging residents to limit their movements and activity. New South Wales Health Officer Dr Kerry Chant says it'll be days before things can turn around.
We will need at least another 5 days to see this picture turn around. And therefore, it is important the community understands that the numbers are not expected to decline for another 5 days. But if we don't want to see these cases dribble on, we all have a role to play in adhering to the health advice.
Those caught breaking the rules face punishment, with police issuing 44 tickets so far.
Unbelievably, we saw 2 men sunbaking naked on a beach on the south coast. They were startled by a deer, ran into the National Forest, National Park and got lost. Not only did they require assistance from SES and police to rescue them, they also both received a ticket for $1,000.
In the Northern Territory, it's a race against time. Darwin enters its first day of a snap 48-hour lockdown after a worker at a Central Australian mine tested positive. 900 of his colleagues left the mine and travelled elsewhere before the positive result was returned. 6 cases have been recorded and more are expected. Queensland has also recorded 2 new cases. Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk says a miner who returned from the Northern Territory has the Delta variant of the virus. The response? More restrictions like mask wearing for several regions, including Brisbane, Noosa, Sunshine Coast and Gold Coast.
We're also going back to the 1 per 4 square metre rule. Unfortunately, no dancing, very small numbers at weddings, around 20. You have to be seated to eat and drink, and remember, you've got to wear your mask in there. And then, of course, we are now lowering the number of people to your home, so that'll be 30 people allowed to your home.
Victoria's Premier Dan Andrews is back to work after taking leave for a spinal injury and is pushing for more vaccines. The state recorded no new cases today, but as the Health Minister Martin Foley indicated, it's not out of the woods yet.
We're now seeing the Delta variant of concern leave its mark in almost every major metropolitan setting in the country over an extremely short period of time.
Treasurer Josh Frydenberg says Australia is reaching a new phase of the pandemic with the Delta variant. The National Security Committee has been meeting today to discuss outbreaks as the country's COVID situation worsens.
A call for the COVID vaccine rollout to ramp up on both sides of the ditch if the Trans-Tasman bubble is to stay afloat. All quarantine-free travel from Australia is on pause until at least tomorrow night. The Australia-New Zealand Leadership Forum worked on protocols and advice for the governments on the quarantine-free travel, with two-way tourism trade worth more than $5 billion to the 2 countries. Anne Sherry, the co-chair of the forum, believes the attitude of some towards COVID vaccination is putting everyone at risk.
The spread of the new variant in Australia anyway is now in kids, in primary school age kids. So I think all the adults who've been sitting around thinking we'll be fine maybe need to think a bit more about the impact that has on others around them rather than their own personal preferences. I think we're getting to the point now where it's hard to imagine why you think it would be okay for you to get it if you can spread it as far and wide as this case has gone in Australia.
So do you think some people are being a bit selfish?
Well, I can't criticise individuals because everyone makes their own choices. But if you've got no health reason to not get vaccinated, then I'd question why you haven't.
So if we're looking at the bubble as something that we're learning from and we change the rules as things change, do you think the Trans-Tasman quarantine-free bubble should only be for those people who are fully vaccinated then?
I don't know that we've come to a landing on... look, firstly, so few people have been vaccinated. 5% of Australians. And I'm not sure what the percentage is in New Zealand, but
about 8%. About 8% fully vaccinated. Yeah.
So 5% in Australia and 8% in New Zealand. That's not much travel. I do think, though, we need to give people incentive to get vaccinated. So maybe when there is a lockdown, people who have been vaccinated could travel, and those who haven't been vaccinated shouldn't travel. But we haven't got to that point yet. I think what we're learning is the lockdown stop spread, and that includes shutting down the bubble. But we've got to get to a better place to manage this because, we're 18 months into it, 2 years by the end of the year by the time we get decent vaccination rates. how long do we think we can just sit in our bubbles and hope that everything else keeps chugging along? I'm not sure another season without tourists, another season without anyone really travelling to some parts of New Zealand. You know, I was in Queenstown a few weeks ago. It was pretty quiet, but they were optimistic about the school holidays and the next ski season with Aussies coming to New Zealand. But that's not looking so optimistic now. So I think we need a better plan. This plan is okay, but it's pretty conservative, and in the long term, we might all be safe, but we won't have a lot of stuff we can do. We'll lock ourselves down to very small economies, very small communities, and I'm not sure how sustainable that is over more than a 2 to 3 year period.
We have a lot of people getting in touch with this program, and some of them don't think that the Trans-Tasman bubble is worth it at the moment. Has it been?
Well, I think if you speak to the businesses that have got people moving backwards and forwards again who haven't been moving, they would say it is. I've seen plenty of people travelling and going to see families both ways. They would say it is. If you've got no reason to travel, maybe you don't care, but there are plenty of people who do have reason to travel who think it's worthwhile.
So, Anne, bottom line then, are you saying that both our countries need to do better with their vaccination rollout?
I think we need to give it some acceleration because we also have a lot of countries around us dependent on us. I mean, I watched imagery last night of fighting in Fiji over someone who'd stolen crops. Now, when you get to the stage in your near neighbours where people are fighting over food because they're so dependent on tourism, they're so dependent on both Australians and New Zealanders coming in and out and them getting work in both Australia and New Zealand, can we really, in good conscience, just sit by and watch that happen because we're comfortable? I think we've got there's a bigger world around us. There's a lot of places very dependent on Australia and New Zealand in the region, and they're doing it tough at the moment. They are getting vaccinated actually at faster rates than most of us are in Australia and in New Zealand, but their economies are collapsing, and that puts a lot of vulnerable people at risk. And I personally don't think we should just sit by and watch that happen and say, well, we're okay, so see ya.
So what do we need to do then? Because both Australia and New Zealand have donated vaccinations to Fiji. So what more is it that you would like us to do?
I think both Fiji and Vanuatu and our near neighbours, those people also need work. They need income coming in and out. Vaccination is step one, but work is as important for those communities because they need income. And that work comes in, sometimes they come to our countries to work and send money home. But tourism, of course, is 80% of the economy in most of the region. And until we get ourselves comfortable with the idea that we can travel, that won't change.
So we need to get travelling again?
Yeah, we need to get vaccinated and then we need to start at least travelling in the region and opening, as was discussed. Both the Prime Ministers, when they met in Queenstown, talked about gradually starting to open more bubbles. And I think the Pacific's a really important bubble for all of us. But of course, we do need higher rates of vaccination. So we haven't got people from either Australia or New Zealand taking COVID into those communities or vice versa.
And Sherry from the Australia-New Zealand Leadership Forum there. Ibiza's famous club scene is hoping to bounce back as Britain gives the green tick for holidays there. In preparation for an influx of British tourists, key workers have danced the night away at a test event to make sure it's safe. The BBC's Anna Holligan reports.
Music is the heartbeat of this island. Ibiza's economy is built around a club scene.
You can't stop pubbing, simple as, there needs to be a place for it somewhere, and if it's not here, it's going to be somewhere else.
DJ Fat Phil Cooper came to Ibiza decades ago.
This island thrives off that. It brings so much money to the island.
and all the fringe people that are connected to that, whether it's the cleaners, the bar staff, the security, the people who run the taxi firms. We all need it. Can the island survive without the clubs? We'll see, I guess.
They might not have to if this test event is a success. I'm inside Hard Rock Cafe now, where this trial event is taking place. There's a view over the Mediterranean Sea, and places here have been reserved for people who kept the island safe during the COVID crisis. The new clubbing essentials required a regular temperature, ticket and proof you don't have COVID. It's the local people in the queue tonight. They're the guinea pigs, the nursing staff, doctors and other essential workers. Lucia told me, I really want to dance. It's been so long since we've been able to party around here. Her friend said it's true. After such a long time, you do really want to go for it. Right now, there are no restrictions on people flying in from the UK, but the Balearic politicians have asked the Spanish government to tighten the entry controls so that anyone who hasn't been double vaccinated must show a negative PCR or antigen test to get in.
Well, let's hear what you've got to say about QR scanning and potentially being mandatory in some high-risk places. This listener says making scanning compulsory will not work because enforcement is very hard. What we need to achieve is making not scanning totally socially unacceptable. Grant, on the other hand, says yes to compulsory scanning and signing in. Another listener says, I'd love to scan with the COVID Tracer app, but my 4-year-old phone is too old to run the app. More on this after 6.
RNZ News at 6. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata with DNA. The government is considering mandatory scanning of the COVID Tracer app and mask use in high-risk venues. To date, official health advice has been that making scanning and masks compulsory is simply not practical. Annika Smith reports.
Mandatory QR code scanning and mask use have always been on the table, and today the government signalled it's seriously considering them. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says bars and restaurants could be places where people are legally obliged to scan in on arrival, under Alert Level 2 and above. She says Cabinet is planning to make a decision on scanning next week. One issue ministers will have to look at is whether they can actually mandate scanning within the rules set by Apple and Google. That and requiring masks would bring New Zealand in line with other countries, like Australia.
The government can't say how long two contacts of a Northern Territory miner with COVID-19 have spent in the community since travelling to New Zealand. Both are isolating at home and are being tested. One has returned a negative result and the other's result is expected tomorrow. COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins also wouldn't say where in the country the two people are located.
At this point, they are a potential contact. There's not even any evidence at this point to identify whether they are a contact. We've already had one test result back from them, from one of those two people. It's already come back negative. If we were to see anything that suggested that there was any risk, then of course we would use our contact tracing system to run that risk to ground.
The two contacts will both undertake further testing around day 5. Air New Zealand says it's dropped from 30 flights a day to 10 across the Tasman while the travel bubble is on hold. Chief Executive Greg Foran told Checkpoint the hiccup is causing plenty of disruption for customers and the airline. He estimates flights across between New Zealand and Australia made up about 50 to 20% of the company's revenue. He says it's hard to know the full financial impact without knowing how long the disruption will continue.
Our view is let's just work this one through carefully, and we know that the demand is there, and as soon as we feel we can get back up and running, then we're keen to do exactly that.
Greg Foran is optimistic the bubble will resume soon, and he's not worried people will be put off travelling to Australia in the long term. The head girl at Christchurch Girls High says they have started to take steps to protect themselves to avoid being sexually harassed. A school commission survey has revealed 20 girls have been raped and 60% have been harassed, including groping or verbal abuse. Most incidents were not reported. The school's head girl, Amiria Tikau, says girls shouldn't have to take steps to protect themselves. She says the behaviour has been normalised and they are ready to call it out. A jury's been discharged after failing to reach verdicts on whether Arthur Allen Thomas is guilty of raping and indecently assaulting 2 women. The jury began deliberating in the Manukau District Court on Thursday afternoon. Chen Liu reports.
The jury, made up of 8 men and 4 women, couldn't decide verdicts on 1 charge of rape and 4 of indecent assault Arthur Thomas faced. They related to 2 complainants and all are historical. Judge John Bergson says the outcome is no reflection on the jurors and it happens sometimes. The case was put off until a call-over in August. The 83-year-old was pardoned over the still unsolved murders of Jeanette and Harvey Crew in 1970. He refused to comment when leaving the court, escorted by his family.
Nearly 3 months after the election, Samoa's political crisis may be close to being resolved. The Supreme Court today ruled that Parliament must convene within 7 days. RNZ Pacific's Don Wiseman reports.
The court ruled that a swearing-in ceremony by the majority Fast Party of its MPs on the lawn on May the 24th, when the Speaker locked them out of the chamber, was illegal. But the court has also said that Parliament must sit within 7 days, warning that otherwise contempt charges are likely. On Friday, the Court of Appeal ruled that the issue of a 6th women's electoral seat could not prevent the convening of Parliament, as the caretaker HRPP government had claimed. When Parliament does sit, Fast is expected to officially become the government, as it has 26 seats to the HRPP's 24.
The water supply crisis in Horowhenua has eased, but businesses and residents will have to continue to conserve water for up to 36 hours. Heavy rain over the weekend has meant the district's silt-laden water treatment plants could not keep up with demand. At lunchtime today, the council said if water consumption didn't reduce, parts of the district could run out of water. It says tankers are filling the treatment plant at Tokomaru, and the Shannon plant is now producing good water. The Levin plant remains compromised, but its situation is improving. It's 5 minutes past 6. Richie Mo'unga says he and Beauden Barrett openly discussed their contest for the All Blacks number 10 jersey. The pair resume that battle this week ahead of the All Blacks' first test of the year against Tonga in Auckland. Mo'unga says from his perspective it's certainly not an unhealthy competition.
We're open about it. We address the elephant in the room. For us, it's about whatever's best for the team doing that. If he's wearing the 10 jersey this week, how can I best prepare him? It's about putting your ego on the hook.
Meanwhile, loose forward Lachlan Bosher is leaving the Chiefs, having signed a 2-year deal to play for Japanese club Panasonic. Defending men's champion Novak Djokovic will be the first on centre court when Wimbledon starts tonight. The Serbian is favoured to retain his title and equal Roger Federer and Rafa Nadal's record of 20 Grand Slam men's single titles. 2-time champion Andy Murray will also make his first appearance in the singles since 2017. 8-time Wimbledon champion Federer, who turns 40 in August, pulled out of the French Open to prepare for the London tournament. Romania's Simona Halep, who won the women's title in 2019, pulled out at the weekend with a calf injury. Japan's 4-time Grand Slam champion Naomi Osaka and Spanish great Nadal are also missing from the grass court Grand Slam. And in the ANZ Netball Premiership tonight, the 4th place Southern Steel play the bottom place Waikato Bay of Plenty Magic in Invercargill. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Zoe George talks sport. Yes, she's rather excited about the cricket. The final of Untold Pacific takes us to Fiji, the land of military coups and indentured labour. And Stephen Coates on how Soviet music lovers got around bans on Western music by pressing records into X-rays. So you can check out your fracture, then play the Rolling Stones on your record player and be the life of the party on Nights of me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. A cold outbreak brings snow to low levels in both islands, gales to many areas. Taranaki across to Taupo and Bay of Plenty northwards, occasional showers clearing tomorrow afternoon. Whanganui, Manawatu and Taihape showers, snow to 400 metres tomorrow. Horowhenua to Wellington, also Gisborne to Wairarapa, mostly fine tonight. Showers tomorrow, possibly thundery. Snow to 300 metres in the south. Marlborough and Nelson mainly fine. rain showers before dawn tomorrow. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland showers, some heavy with snow in Fiordland. Showers clearing Westland tonight, elsewhere tomorrow. For Canterbury, scattered showers with possible thunderstorms about the coast. Snow lowering to 200 metres tomorrow morning. Otago and Southland, heavy showers and possible thunderstorms with snow lowering to near sea level. Showers easing and becoming isolated tomorrow. Chatham Island, showers with snow about the hilltops tomorrow night. RNZ National, it's 8 minutes past 6.
Kia ora rā e hoa, no mai, hoki mai. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The high hopes tourism towns had for the Australian school holidays have come down in a screaming heap with the brakes put on the Trans-Tasman bubble. As well as that, the Prime Minister's ruled out financial help for businesses like ski fields who brought in reinforcements for the busy season. Our reporter Timothy Brown joins us live from Queenstown, Tahuna. Hi Timothy, how are people feeling down there?
Kia ora, Lisa. The news of the suspension of the Trans-Tasman bubble has been a real bitter blow for people down here. They had prepared for hopefully the beginning of a resurgence of Queenstown's tourist industry with Australian visitors coming through during the Australian school holidays. There were 9 flights expected to come into the resort town today. That's 4 from Sydney, 3 from Melbourne and 2 from Brisbane. 1,500 visitors on board those flights, all cancelled. Cancellations are coming out of nowhere for businesses now. They've been described as an avalanche of cancellations. There is very little good mood in the area today.
What about the New Zealand school holidays on the horizon? What kind of hope's that bringing?
Well, that is the hope now. They have to have hope, and New Zealand school holidays is it. Obviously, that is a big chunk of the market. The domestic market makes up a huge proportion of Queenstown's tourism income over the winter holiday period. And now all eyes are towards the New Zealand school holiday period, as there is a suspicion here that the Trans-Tasman bubble suspension will be extended and visitors won't be here during the Aussie school holidays.
Just watching behind you there, Timothy, lots of people wandering past with big, heavy coats on. Looks tino makarere, very cold there. What can you tell us about the polar blast?
It is bitterly cold. It is bitterly cold here. Down at lake level, snow is not settling. I think it's fair to describe what's happening here at the moment as a skiff of snow, but up on the hills there is already snow settling. There's a huge amount of snow up on the Alpine roads, the Crown Range in particular. We had to get the chains out today to cross it as we came across from Cadrona Alpine Resort. It's hazardous out there and it's very, very icy.
Yeah, so what's Waka Kotahi telling people?
All the usual advice. There is obviously a severe weather warning in place from the Met Service now. If people don't need to travel, they're being advised to stay at home. The Alpine passes, not just the Crown Range, but the others around the South Island will be particularly treacherous. So if you're out on the roads, chains are going to be necessary, very likely, and those following distances have to be greater due to the icy conditions.
Ngā mihi mō te rā e ho, go and get warm. Thanks very much, Timothy. Compulsory QR scanning and mask wearing could be on the cards as Cabinet weighs up its options. The government's been under pressure to make more COVID measures mandatory after an Australian tourist visited Wellington before testing positive with the Delta variant of the virus. The use of the COVID-19 Tracer app has plummeted in recent months, with less than a third of the contacts of the Sydney traveller scanning into locations of interest. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says QR codes could be made compulsory in high-risk settings, as well as bars and restaurants.
We acknowledge there will be some inconvenience associated with the idea of mandatory scanning, but it's an inconvenience that pales compared to venues having to limit gatherings, physically distance people or shut their doors altogether. We would expect that over time requiring people to scan in would become a part of normal life, just like checking people's ID at a bar.
She says there are legal and practical considerations, including enforcement.
Ultimately, of course, we want people to be responsible for scanning themselves, but in terms of who's checking and enforcing, that's when you're looking at an operator. We know that's a big burden for them to carry, which is why we don't take these things lightly, and these are the questions we're getting advice on.
Cabinet will also consider whether to change the rules around mask use at alert level 2 or higher. At the moment, face masks are only mandatory on public transport, but Jacinda Ardern says they could soon be compulsory in other settings. Well, joining me now is the Chief Executive of Employment Manufacturers Association, Brett O'Reilly. Hi, Brett. Have you been part of any discussions with government officials on making QR codes mandatory and how that would be enforced?
Not so far. It's obviously been an issue that's been around in the past and was certainly something we talked about last year. But no, there's been no active dialogue so far seeking our views about this.
Would you want to be part of that conversation before a decision's made?
Absolutely. I think we can all see the merit of the idea because all businesses want to be able to operate as normally as possible, and every time we go into another alert level, we know the impact that has on businesses and their workers. But there are quite major issues to be worked through to make something like this work.
What do you think those are, Brett?
Well, I think that the as was covered in your remarks, I mean the overhead that it would that a business would be taking on in dealing with this is something that you'd need to really think carefully about. I know the hospitality industry. We've talked to them about this in the past, and I've been nervous about this as another overhead for them to have to deal with. How do you deal with it in a retail situation?
When you say it's another overhead to deal with, do you mean they're going to have to hire someone extra, or is it just the idea that they have to turn into the sort of hospitality police?
I think a combination of those things. If you're in a retail store, how does someone who's serving a customer know that someone's scanned in? I mean, how do you police that, and who becomes responsible for that? If the responsibility is on the individual, and there's going to be some kind of penalty for not scanning in, well then maybe maybe that will deter people, but it doesn't deter people from talking on the phone in their cars. So I'm not sure it's going to deter people. It's going to deter people from not scanning. So I think those issues are the sort of things that we have to work through to see if this is actually really practical.
Brett, could some businesses, though, make it a little easier for people? I don't know what your experience is, but sometimes you wander around and it's a game of hide and seek to find the code.
Yep, I agree with that. I mean, I think we could have stronger guidelines around where the codes are displayed. I've had that same experience myself. I mean, I try and scan and wherever I go, and sometimes it's not that obvious. I mean, clearly, if you've got your code near the till, that's certainly good practice, because most people, particularly if it's in a hospitality situation, are going to have to go and pay. And so if you locate the code by where you pay, then that's a pretty good clue. That as you're doing that, and if you haven't already scanned in, you could. So there are practical things like that that I think can work. But to take something like this and blanketly apply it, I think we just need to really think our way through it and see if that's the best way of encouraging people to comply.
Can we turn our attention to the Trans-Tasman bubble for a minute, right? So it's been suspended until at least midnight tomorrow night. Was business seeing any big gains from quarantine-free travel with Oz?
Well, it's been a bit of a dual-edged sword. One of the things that our members are telling us is that we've had the Australian recruitment industry here in force looking to lure people across to Australia. It is a pretty common labour market, as we know. So we've certainly had New Zealand workers getting offers to go.
What industries, Brett? What industries are they targeting?
The higher skilled professionals. So people in the technology industry, definitely people in infrastructure. There's a global shortage of technology workers. There's a global shortage of infrastructure workers, and we've seen, one of the approaches. One of Auckland's major recruiters told me, "Look, we've been told find someone in this technology area, take their New Zealand salary, triple it, and that'll be their starting salary in Sydney or Melbourne in New Zealand dollars." And that's pretty hard for New Zealand employers to compete against.
So do you secretly want the bubble not to be working, Brett?
No, I don't want that, Lisa, because we know how important it is for New Zealand business people to be able to travel, to get to see customers, to get into markets. And
are they, though? Are they taking that opportunity to do face-to-face, or have we now got into the habit of just Zooming and all of that carry on?
They would like to take the opportunity to do it face-to-face. One of the constraints at the moment continues to be the vaccination program. We know businesses who there have been repeated calls for exporters to be prioritised in the vaccination program. They have not been prioritised, so we know many of our members, across our 7,500 members, one of our largest cohorts is an export, and we know exporters who would like to be travelling into market to deal with customers, but
so,
they
Brett,
are reluctant
just to be
do it
clear
without
here,
vaccination.
Yeah, if they want vaccination in order to go, obviously the government said everyone will be offered it by the end of the year, but do you think there's a case for businesses to, go to the front of the queue?
Not to the front of the queue, but I think if there are situations where, there's been no provision made for them. And naturally, the vaccination program has been around prioritising the people who are at risk from a health perspective. But I guess what I'm saying is every time we have a delay in the vaccination program, every time we don't get vaccinations out there, that's more money that New Zealand businesses are losing because they can't conduct business as usual. So that's an important criteria for us to make sure that in balancing the vaccination program, you're also taking into account people's livelihoods and people's jobs.
Good to talk to you, Brett. That's Brett O'Reilly, who's the boss at EMA. It is 19 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Horowhenua residents and businesses have been warned the district will run out of clean drinking water if they don't drastically reduce or stop using it altogether. Heavy rain over the weekend has meant silt is clogging up the district's water treatment plants and they can't keep up with demand. Our reporter Robin Martin has more.
More than 250 mils of rain fell in the Upper Mangahao River catchment in the Tararua Ranges over the weekend, and that combined with heavy lowland rainfall caused water treatment plants in Levin, Shannon and Tokomaru to grind almost to a halt. Horowhenua Mayor Bernie Wandin didn't mince his words when he addressed the district via Facebook Live at lunchtime today.
There is a real risk that the water supply will run out, and the community will need to rely on bottled water or water tank supplies to service their minimum requirements.
The council had already dispatched water tankers to Shannon and 2 locations in Levin and asked some businesses to close down. Spokesperson for the Alliance Meatworks at Levin, Renee Walker, says it shut down its morning shift, affecting 150 staff.
At the moment, what we have heard from Council is that we are likely to be closed tomorrow as well. Obviously, there's an impact on the individuals because if they're not working, they're not getting paid. So we're also looking at that.
Ms Walker says at this stage in the season, the shift is processing about 240 cattle and uses about 500 cubic metres of water. In peak season, it requires 1,500 cubic metres per shift. The plant has since been told it will be able to reopen midday Wednesday, but Ms Walker says it won't be straightforward.
If we can open it again on Wednesday morning, obviously we need to do testing of the water. We can't just, because water's available, we can't just start processing again because we need to test and make sure that it's suitable for human consumption and work with MPI on that before we can start processing again.
Ms Walker says it's more likely the plant will begin processing again on Thursday. She couldn't quantify the losses to the company. Jeanette Berry is the manager at Cobb & Co Levin. She says initially there was confusion about whether it was a water supply or water quality issue.
Well, we've actually had the food control person come over personally and let us know because we use a lot of water and we're just going to boil water, which we're doing in the process, but we'll stop now. Just to be able to cook all our food and everything with. But, we've just been told to close down for maybe up to 3 days.
Ms Berry likened the impact to a COVID-19 lockdown.
It's a bit like when COVID hits, loss of sales, same sort of thing, situation really. We've had to send staff home. I've had to ring all the staff and tell them not to come in. We're quite privileged. We've made up a family page, so I've just told them all just to keep an eye on that, and I'll let them know when they can come back to work.
She says it will hit the business's bottom line.
On average Monday night, we probably would have do about 80 people for tea, so that's 80 people there. Tomorrow, I think it's pension week. That's not going to help either. There goes another, 100 people for the day.
The owner of the Salt and Pepper Cafe, Ivania Wins, took things into her own hands.
We've got a drip feed system here where so every time it floods we turn off our system so that we've got no town supply hitting our tanks. So what's in our water tanks is safe. I've rung and spoken to the local water supply today, and he's more than happy to keep topping our tank up with fresh, safe water until we can turn back on the town supply.
She says the messaging from council has been a little confusing.
They said that they're not keeping up with the water supply issue, with the water supplies. I've heard two different things, but then they also said a boil water notice as well, but our water's safe, and then we'll just, if it's a water supply issue, we're going to buy in our water buy our water in.
That will cost the business $280 each time it refills its 20,000 litre tank. Schools have so far been able to remain open. In a statement this afternoon, the Horowhenua District Council says it's not out of the woods yet, and residents and businesses will have to continue to conserve water for the next 24 to 36 hours. But it says concerns have eased at Shannon, where the treatment plant is operating again normally, and at Tokomaru, where it's being supplemented with water from tankers.
Okay, a bit of your feedback on QR codes. This person is saying compulsory scanning for larger businesses and venues to enforce scanning QR codes. Public shaming for people not scanning. No scan, no enter. Is there not public shaming already? Don't you get the stink eye if you don't scan in? Another listener says no compulsory scanning of QR codes until such time as the scanning technology can cater for older phones like mine. Someone else said their phone is 4 years old and it doesn't scan. I'm wondering how new your phone has to be in order for it to work. On the bubble, Queenstown, this listener saying not worth it. There is an even worse variant called Delta Plus around the corner. People matter more than the ski slopes and motels. Local holidays for locals to keep those as going concerns, says Rick. Kiwi families should go on holiday now to fill up the accommodation. Tell schools to pause the pressure to be studious. That's an interesting one. And Peter reckons absolutely yes to support for locally owned businesses and workers in Queenstown. Absolutely no to public money going to multinational hotel chains. Thanks for your feedback. Two Kiwis are riding the Olympic wave as surfing makes its debut at the Games. It's hoped Ella Williams and Billy Stearman's appearance at the Tokyo Games will inspire even more Kiwis to get on board. It's one of 6 new sports on the schedule at Tokyo after being added to the list in 2016. Clay Wilson headed to Piha Surf Club today to meet with the two surfers, hoping to wipe out the competition.
For a long time, the Olympic Games weren't on Billy Stearman's radar. But that all changed in 2016.
10 years ago, I didn't think I was going to be an Olympian, and then as soon as it came on, that was the top of my goals list, and I did everything I could to get here. So, yeah, and I'm super proud of, what I've achieved and hopefully what I will achieve over there.
A pride boosted by the battles the 31-year-old has gone through in his 5-year-long pursuit of Games selection. The Raglan surfer's overcome a significant injury and lost his mother to cancer during that time. He says it's been an emotional last couple of weeks.
Just getting goosebumps every time someone says you're an Olympian, and I know for sure my mum would be super proud. We were pretty close when I was quite younger, and I know she'd be super stoked, and my whole family and my wife is here today and a few of my mates, so everyone's super proud.
The same goes for Ella Williams, especially after a wait of almost 2 years since she and Stearman clinched a provisional spot for Tokyo at the 2019 World Surfing Games.
It is pretty tough just waiting for that official call, but I'm very stoked. It's finally official and we are 2.5 weeks out and I couldn't be more excited. And finally getting the uniform today, it makes it feel more real.
That excitement isn't just down to what it means on a personal level. The former world junior champion says the sport's debut at the Olympics means even more people will be able to watch and learn about surfing.
Such such a cool sport to be in. So I hope it inspires people to get into surfing and to give it a go, and that no matter what age you are, you can do it and you can have a lot of fun. It's good for the mind, the body and the soul.
It's already having that effect. Surfing New Zealand General Manager Ben Kennings says the profile that comes with being an Olympic sport is huge.
So we're already seeing surfing teams popping up in schools around the country, and some inland schools and stuff as well have actually got surf teams. We've got more interest in learn to surf programs through junior schools and intermediate schools as well. So if you can grow that base, then you're going to get the Ellas and the Billies popping out of the top.
And he's delighted Williams and Stearman have emerged as New Zealand's first 2 Olympic surfers.
They're always keen to do everything. They always put their best foot forward. They train hard in and out of the water. Surfing's probably in the past has been notorious for just surfing, but taking that attitude and that commitment in the water and bringing it onto land.
It's why Kennings and the surfers themselves are far from ruling out a medal in Tokyo. Stearman, in fact, not ruling out gold, despite a star-studded Olympic field. As an 8-time national champion, and with a monumental upset of 11-time world champion Kelly Slater in Western Australia 10 years ago in his memory, he knows anything is possible.
Just knowing you can beat the best, is definitely a huge confidence booster, and I have competed against a lot of those guys going to Tokyo, so I know what they surf like, and I know their capabilities and my capabilities, and I think we're pretty on even.
Stearman and Williams depart for Japan on July 18th, with the Olympic surfing competition to be held in Chiba, around an hour's drive from central Tokyo.
Well, a lot of you have got a lot to say on QR scanning, whether it should be compulsory. This listener says, I'm constantly amazed at how slack restaurants are about advertising their COVID Tracer app barcode. The first things people do when they sit down for a meal is get their cell phones out. Well, maybe that's the first thing they've done wrong. But anyway, if each table has a small COVID Tracer code, either on the menu or stuck on the table, and of course at the entrance and the checkout, well, maybe that would get people scanning. Tom says, hi, stink eye. That's a technical term, right? You bet, Tom. Stink eye is a technical term. Hey, that's almost all we've got time for this evening. First up, we'll be with you from 5 o'clock tomorrow morning with a Wellington business owner forced to close after the Australian tourist visited. She's calling for mandatory pre-flight testing when the bubble reopens. Angus has got in touch. Angus is down in Lawrence saying news of light snow in Lawrence can assure you that there is a good covering of snow here. Plenty for snowball fights. Tino makarere, very cold. Stay warm. Back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The government will make a decision next week on mandatory scanning of the COVID Tracer app and mask use in high-risk venues. The COVID response minister says two people in isolation are just potential contacts of a Northern Territory miner with COVID-19. Air New Zealand says it's too early to know the full financial impact of the Trans-Tasman bubble being on hold. Waves as large as 6 metres will strike Wellington tomorrow as a chilly blast sweeps up the country. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
The Victorian government's actually described it as a beast. People have actually contracted the virus from just passing people on the street. That's how contagious it is.
Live with local, national and international stories and some music with your news.
They seem to sing along with the vocal melody